Welcome back to another episode of the Best You podcast. Today, I'm joined by Melanie Murphy, a dynamic registered dietitian nutritionist and the 2023 Young Dietitian of the Year. In this episode, Melanie shares essential tips for improving gut health, detoxifying the body, and aligning your diet with seasonal changes. We'll dive into her top recommended health tests for women, strategies for effective detoxification, and an exciting concept called Circadian Seasonal Eating, which will help you choose the best foods for fall and winter. By the end of this episode, you're going to know exactly which tests to consider, how to detox more effectively, and which seasonal foods can boost your health and vitality this time of year. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the follow button on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Best You podcast. I am super excited today to be joined by Melanie Murphy. We're going to talk about gut health, digestive health, and we're going to also talk about some maybe topics today that we have never discussed on the podcast before and that are maybe a little bit more nuanced, things like seasonal eating and timing your eating with your circadian rhythm, because I know me personally, I don't really know that much about those particular topics, and I'm intrigued to always find new ways to up-level and optimize my habits, and so I'm excited to get into some of that stuff as well, and then maybe some plant-based nutrition ideas and science and stuff like that as well. But I want to start off with digestive health and gut health because I know that's where a lot of your story comes from. You battled IBS starting in 2006 for about 6 years and had some crazy symptoms and everything like that. I kind of want to just dive into what did you do to discover what was really wrong with you? Because a lot of people are experiencing issues like this, and they get testing and see this person and that person and this person, and they sometimes feel lost and confused as to what am I supposed to do, and they feel lost in the discovery process. So what did you do to ultimately discover what was wrong with you and what was kind of causing the issues that you were experiencing?
Yeah, it's something as a gut health practitioner I see all the time. People come to me incredibly discouraged, and they have done everything. They've seen all of the Western doctors, done all of the Western tests and labs. And not to say that, not to come out the gate hating on Western medicine. I actually come from Western doctors. I fully believe in lots of the different offerings of Western medicine. But the one thing that I will say is that they don't really know. I feel like most gastroenterologists that I've seen, allergen people that I've seen, these are the people you think to go to. Like, I think I have a food allergy. Let's go to an allergist. It's really doesn't work like that, as I have found. And one of the biggest changes and shifts for me in my own journey was seeing a naturopathic doctor who actually ran specialty laboratory testing on not only my microbiome, but on my methylation pathways, on my mitochondria and on my hormones, things that you would never really up until, I went through this process and got my master's degree in nutrition on myself, I would never have thought to think, oh yeah, my hormones and my mitochondria are probably very linked to how well my digestive health is doing. And I don't think that a lot of doctors today have made those connections well. So seeing a naturopathic doctor was a huge, huge win for me. And actually getting the right types of testing was huge. Because going and getting a microbiome test from a Western lab, they might run the right test, but they're not necessarily reading them properly, or they're not able to deduce what's happening actually inside of your gut. So working with somebody who's really specialized in that area was pretty game changing for me.
Yeah, I know this question is going to depend on what symptoms people are experiencing and what negative things people are experiencing, but what do you feel like are some really important tests just generally, maybe for anybody to really get, whether or not they're experiencing crazy negative symptoms or not? Like, what are some of these maybe like tests that you wouldn't necessarily get from your typical Western doctor, if you will, that are maybe really important for a lot of us?
The one that is the kind of my golden child is the organic acid test, the Oat Test. It's a urine test that you can take that not only, it basically tests the metabolites of the microbiota that are in your body, and also the metabolites of energy production. So it's able to tell you things like whether you have Aspergillus mold or candida or yeast. It can also tell you how your neurotransmitters are being produced. If you're having, maybe your neurotransmitters are being produced because you aren't getting enough of your B vitamins, right? So it gives you kind of a nice picture. I use the organic acid test in my practice as a compass. It's a really beautiful place to begin with people, especially if they're kind of confused on what is happening. So definitely the Oat test. For my female patients, I love running actual Dutch panels, hormonal panels, real comprehensive hormonal panels. Those can be incredibly beneficial to understanding what's going on. And then oftentimes the third most used, actually I'll say two more. I was going to say an environmental toxin panel is really helpful. I don't think a lot of people consider the importance of the toxins in our environment as it relates to how our body is responding from a gut brain perspective. So environmental toxin panels are super helpful to understand what types of, molds, heavy metals, things are in your environment that could be blocking certain hormonal pathways or things like that. And then the IgG food sensitivity testing. So that's the last one that I would say is probably the fourth most common that I use in my practice. But I will say that the IgG food sensitivity testing is a finger prick blood lab that you take, pretty simple blood lab, very different than what you would get at an allergen office that does the skin prick tests, right? But I will say that the IgG test, the only thing to remember if you're using that is that you should never use it as your lifetime Bible, because as your body heals, oftentimes I will see those labs change. And you will notice that you're actually not as sensitive to certain foods over time than you were when you took that test. So it's something that you would want to run multiple times during the course of a gut protocol to see how your body is improving.
I want to dive a little bit more into this Oat test. I had never heard of this organic acid test. You said it tests the metabolites of your microbiota and your energy production. Tell us a little bit more about what exactly, if somebody is getting this test done and they're seeing the results, is this like going to communicate to them like, okay, this is showing us that you need to make this lifestyle change, this nutritional change, we need to add this food in? Like, what kind of information can we really extract from this practically?
I think a little bit of all of those things, probably depending on the patient. But I happened to, not on purpose, but I happen to specialize in mold, specific mold and yeast, overgrowth and things like that, which just so happens to be something that I see very often on the organic acid test. So what will happen is it will tell you, it's a several page laboratory result, but it will tell you how prevalent or how present certain molds or yeast or microbiota are in your system. But as you continue to read the labs and you see how your mitochondria are functioning, or how much glutathione, which is our body's master antioxidant, how much that's produced in your body at that given moment, how much B6 or B2 you're having, it all tells a story about actually, okay, yeah, you do have quite a bit of mold and it's actually, you're quite sensitive to it. And this is what's happening. And here are the immediate supplements that will help your symptoms. And then here's the protocol that we'll give you to actually eradicate this thing so that we can fix you from this problem. So yeah, it's the results that, or the protocols that I put in place from an organic acid test include not only supplementation to help support the body, because a lot of times what I end up seeing with people that do have elevated mold and yeast panels is that their mitochondria are very taxed and stressed. So we will provide some supplementation or herbal support to help lighten that load, to make sure that their body, so not so much pressure is put on the liver and the kidneys to excrete these things on their own, right? It can be really stressful if you've been in that situation chronically for a while. It will oftentimes come with food. Like, for instance, one thing that I see a lot with yeast is people may not be following a keto diet, but their organic acid test will show very elevated ketones, because yeast tend to prefer to eat glucose. So if you have a lot of yeast in your system and you're not following a keto diet, but your body is telling you you're in a keto state, it can be because the yeast is present and utilizing that glucose before you're able to utilize that glucose. So you have to tap into different energy stores, right? So it's actually really telling to be able to say, okay, you need to revise how you're eating your food. You need to reorder the way that you're eating your food. Here's the diet protocol for that. Reducing your sugar, these kinds of things. So the results of what come from an organic acid test are pretty comprehensive, I would say.
Yeah. What are some of the reasons why somebody might have extensive amounts of mold and yeast overgrowth? Is that like primarily food? Is it primarily like environmental toxins? Is it primarily any particular thing that people are being exposed to?
So really elevated mold values are most commonly associated with environmental exposure. So yes, we have molds and aflatoxins and things like that in our food. Like coffee has some aflatoxins, peanut butter you can get molds from certain foods, but the values that I see are not usually ones that you can really obtain from just consuming a food unless you're eating only that thing in massive quantities every single day. So usually it's environmental, and what will happen is people are living in water damaged homes, like they've had a leak that's molded, or their office spaces have had molds, and now you have these mold spores running around in your breathing air, and you're breathing those in, and those are taking stake in your gut. And a lot of us do have a certain amount of these things, but they're usually living pretty symbiotically, and they're not causing a huge problem. Like you can have certain amounts of mold and certain amounts of yeast in your system and not have it be a problem. But when it gets overgrown is really when we see these symptoms like anxiety, depression, IBS, IBD, hormonal issues, joint pain, bloating and gas is huge when it comes to, the oxalates that yeast produce, right? That's one of the main things that I see in my practice for people with bloating and gas. But I would say environmentally, it's huge. But also, let's say, for instance, give you a little case study example. Let's say, for instance, you lived in a mold exposed building in college. Okay. And that was 10 years ago. If you didn't do anything to eradicate that mold 10 years ago, it's not going to necessarily go away. It's going to be in your system. But let's say you haven't had symptoms until flash forward 10 years later. Why? Why is that happening? The reason that happens is because of things like maybe you had a really stressful 3 months. You had a death in the family, you broke up with your partner, something happened where you're eating a lot of carbohydrates and sugar and things like that, and you're feeding that mold. You're giving them the food that they want to eat. Yeast and mold prefer to eat sugars and carbohydrates and things like this. So if you have a really concentrated period of time where your diet and lifestyle is just a wreck, and be for obviously very good reasons, right? You have now fed that mold that has been otherwise living pretty symbiotically and not causing much of a ruckus, and now it's overgrown. So that can be part of it. It's like a lot of people come to me, I don't understand, I'm not living in mold. Did you ever have an exposure? Because if you did, now it's in your system, and that's okay. But whatever you did in this current environment that now your symptoms are presenting themselves, now it's causing a problem because you've been feeding it and now it's overgrown. We got to get it out of your system. Yeah. Or else you're going to continue to see worsening issues.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. This is fascinating. I think one more question on this topic. If it comes to, let's use that same case study, you were exposed to mold in college in your dorm room and you've had it in your system, but never really had any negative consequences. Let's just say somebody is living right now where, they have no idea whether or not they have mold in their system, but they just wanted to take preventative measures. What are some of the best detoxification ways to maybe get that out of your system to ensure that down the road I don't have any negative consequences?
Or to maybe mitigate it. I would say there's certain, I'm a big fan of probiotics. I know a lot of people are, why not just any, but Saccharomyces boulardii specifically is one strain of bacteria that is really helpful in combating things like yeast and mold. So if you wanted to spot treat, like maybe once a quarter, taking a probiotic that has a decent dose of Saccharomyces boulardii, that would be a really helpful thing to do for your system. Or you could do once a quarter, you could do a week or two of oregano oil therapy, where you did oregano oil. Obviously that's not an everyday thing. These are things that you would spot treat. And by spot treat, I mean like a week or two every few months, right? Sweating is helpful. I would say doing things like sauna and sweating can be really helpful for things like that, for just like improving lymphatic drainage, which is one of the main systems that we get things out of our body, right? But also from a nutritional perspective, prioritizing trying to do your best at eliminating simple sugars as much as possible. But if you are going to be having them, making sure that you have protein, fats, and fiber first. Because when your body is occupied eating proteins, fats, and fibers first, and then you consume like a piece of bread or dessert after that, it's much harder for your gut to uptake that glucose than it would be if you had it on an empty stomach. So just simply like getting into lifestyle habits where you are really good at proteins, fats, fiber first, and carbohydrates at the end. That simple trick will be super helpful in making sure that you don't have too much overgrowth of any of those bacteria.
Awesome. Great. Well, I do want to transition to a little bit of the seasonal eating. I saw one of your latest Instagram posts was about best foods to eat during the autumn or during the fall. So why does seasonal eating matter?
Yeah. Well, our body works off of a circadian seasonal pattern, but believe it or not, even if you live in, Arizona or Palm Desert, your body is still working with the seasons. The thing that I love about this topic is that it's very comforting to me that the earth, the foods that grow during specific seasons of the year, are actually the foods that our body needs to be well in that season, based on, colds and flus and, what have you. So I do talk a lot about seasonal eating, and not just from that sense. Like when you focus on foods that are in season, your body is going to be getting so much more of the nutrients that it actually needs during that period of time, versus like having bananas or blueberries in the winter time is not going to be as beneficial as having pomegranates and sweet potato in the wintertime, because our body needs more minerals. It needs more warmth and minerals to actually support the weather changes, the changes that are happening in our gut, and also the food the minerals that help to produce the neurotransmitters that help it ease that time. So like seasonal depression, for instance, we need more B vitamins to help support serotonin and dopamine production, which can be found in these root veggies and things like that. So seasonal eating and just knowing that the earth is already supplying you with the things that you need is really wonderful to think about. And I don't think a lot of people do, because you can go to the grocery store and get blueberries, bananas, and pistachios any time of the year, because that's just convenient and how our agricultural system works.
Yeah, so I've heard the circadian rhythm from the sense of like your 24-hour biological clock, in the sense of like the conversation of improving your sleep or whatnot. But is there like you said circadian, we have a circadian seasonal rhythm too. So like, what is actually changing, I guess, about our circadian rhythm as we transition from one season to the next? I'm not sure if that's the exact way to word the question or not, but
totally. Here's a good example. Here's one that will, in terms of what you know about circadian patterns within the 24 period. Our body does function best when we eat with the sun. So when we wake up, ideally around, between, 6 and 8 o'clock in the morning, when the sun is up, we will be eating our first meal when the sun is up, because that's when our cortisol level rises. It helps to mitigate, it helps to launch our metabolism. There's lots of reasons why we should be eating within the hour or two of waking up when the sun first comes up. It's also best to follow within a 24-hour period of time to stop eating when the sun goes down, essentially. In a perfect system, that is when your body starts to, because when it gets dark outside, we start producing melatonin, we start suppressing digestive juices. So we're not actually going to be digesting our food as well when it is really dark outside. That's just how our bodies work. So if you think about that on a seasonal scale, for those people that are following circadian eating in a 24-hour period of time, winter times and autumn and winter we have shorter days. So we have to consider, okay, if we have digestive goals or health goals and we are really taking our digestive health to the next level, we might also need to recalibrate when we're eating our meals, because the sun's going down at 5:30, not at 8. So what does that look like from my 12-12 pattern within a day, or my 14-10 pattern within a day? Like, how can I make that work so that I'm actually eating with the sun and not impeding my ability to produce digestive juices optimally past a certain hour? Because that will impact the way that our body digests food, how we extrapolate nutrients from our food, and how we're like it impacts our sleep as well. So if we're eating too late at night, our body's already been sleeping technically for a couple hours, and we decide to have our heaviest meal at 8 p.m., in the middle of winter, you're probably you're going to wake up bloated and not feeling well, and maybe constipated and all these things so it kind of gives you answers as to what some of the symptoms that you're having too.
Yeah.
And knowledge is power that way.
Great. I want to, in a second, get to maybe some of the specific foods that you're prioritizing, like here in the autumn, and then maybe leading into the winter as well. But, you mentioned how eating with the sun, so like the timing of when you eat, it's important to eat maybe within the first couple of hours of waking up or when the sun's up, because cortisol is high for one particular reason, and then stop eating when the sun goes down because of we're suppressing our digestive juices. That's the timing of when you eat. What about the timing of what you eat during those times? Like, is it more important to have specific foods in the morning when the sun comes up? Is it more important to have specific foods in the evening when the sun goes down? Or is it just more about like the timing that is the most important thing of that?
That's a really amazing question. And I would say that my answer is going to be imperfect because everybody is different. But I will say that recent research has shown that women specifically do better with more protein, more fat first thing in the morning, whereas men can do decently well with a fairly carbohydrate rich meal in the morning without too much trouble. So it really does depend on the person. It depends on your unique body makeup and also where you are in, like, I work with mostly women. Let's say 85% of my patients are women. But it also depends on where you are in your own female cycle. Like postmenopausal women are going to respond differently than menopausal women at certain times of the month as well. So, and you have to kind of calibrate a little bit differently. Your hormones are going to be working a little bit differently. But I would say that in general, from a longevity diet perspective, and I'm a student of Dr. Volter-Longo. I'm a huge longevity diet follower and fan. From a longevity diet perspective, which is promoting the more healthy years in your life, elongating not just your lifespan but your health span. His recommendation is, of course, never skip breakfast, and ideally do the eat like a king for breakfast. Have a decent lunch, but have a light dinner is usually going to be better from many perspectives, digestive being just one of those things. So I know a lot of people, I get one of the biggest arguments quote unquote arguments that I get in with people who are really into intermittent fasting and are doing it where they're skipping breakfast and eating their meals really late. Most of the time over the long haul, that's going to cause more inflammation, more health detriment, especially as it relates to your cardiovascular system, for instance, the longer you do that. But there's ways to do intermittent fasting backwards, where you have your biggest meal first thing in the morning and then stop eating earlier in the day. That's actually, you can still do, if you're doing as big as like a 16-8, you can still do that just backwards. I think the problem that people find is that, most of our social engagements and things like that are at night, which I think is probably
Yeah, it's a little bit tough to do sometimes socially and societally. Yeah, as a lot of healthy habits are hard to do with it, given our culture and society. But it's funny. It's very hard to ever, somebody who example might be arguing with you from the intermittent fasting standpoint. From a body composition standpoint, maybe it does really well for them, and maybe over a number of years they're never really impacted, and maybe there's a slight impact over a number of years from doing it, but they can't pinpoint why that happened. It's like things with nutrition and ideas with nutrition are so hard to pinpoint the causation and effect of things, and so it's just very hard to nail these things down. So
Yeah, and I think it's important to you bring up a really good point that I think a lot of people get it in their head that when they found one thing that's worked, that's the thing that's going to continue to always work for them. And
exactly.
it's definitely not the case. Our bodies are changing, like just like what I said about the IgG panel earlier. I was like, the more you heal your gut, the more likely that lab is going to change, and you're actually going to be adding foods that you didn't think you could have before. And you have to constantly retest and trial and figure out, you just have to be in tune with, it's important to really honor and be in tune with what your body is telling you in any given moment of your life, because it very well will change. Yeah. And the older we get, the more our needs actually do change. We need more protein as we get older, to maintain muscle mass. We need different types of nutrients and things like that as we get older. So what worked for you in your 20s, especially, I'm a woman, but like, that's not going to be the same as what works for you in your 40s. It's just simply not. And I would say the same of men think like there's this one thing that has worked for me always. And I'm like, well, you could be surprised that something else is going to work better for you now. And it might be contrary to what you originally thought. So.
Yeah. And then again, some people will say what worked for me. It's like, what do you mean by what worked? Because it just body composition standpoint where your energy level is great. Like what worked is a lot different from the definition for people. Yeah. And kind of along the same lines, actually, to clarify, you mentioned how maybe some of the research right now is showing that women do better with protein and fat in the morning, maybe men more carbs in the morning. When you say like, works better, what do you mean by works better? Is it like from a digestive standpoint, they're more easily able to digest it and maybe doesn't have as big of a negative impact on like blood sugar? Like what does it does better with mean?
That's a really good clarifying question, isn't it? I would say it works better from a hormonal and weight perspective primarily. And in the way that because of the way that our hormones are different and how they fluctuate, from a female perspective, the way that insulin responds to certain foods at different cycles, it is better for women to have higher fat, higher protein to support those changing hormonal needs throughout the month. But then again, there's certain times in the month where carbohydrates are the better source of fuel. Specifically in the follicular phase, the first half of your cycle. So it depends. You have to, there's no one size fits all for anybody, especially as you look at males versus females and the differences there. But even within each demographic, it's complete. Yeah. Somebody that has heart disease versus somebody that doesn't is going to, function differently in the morning with different types of food. So yeah, it's important to know thyself. Know thyself.
Sure. For sure. Well, I want to get into a few specific maybe foods, both maybe for autumn and then maybe heading into winter, because people are going to listen to this right when it comes out and then a little bit after it comes out as well. And autumn, obviously, some of like the foods that maybe jump out are like sweet potatoes, spaghetti squash. You mentioned pomegranates. What are some maybe other foods that you're specifically working to get in during the season of autumn or fall?
Yeah, I'm a huge gourd fan. All of the gourds, the delicata squashes, the pumpkins, you mentioned the sweet potatoes and the yams. The root veggies are really, the gourds and the root veggies during fall and winter are staples. And that also includes things like carrots and beets and turnips and things like that. You'll also notice too that in the winter and the fall, we have a lot of orange and red colors in the seasonal fruits and veggies that are available. And that's actually because of the beta carotene and the vitamin A that we need extra of, and all of that really wonderful immune enhancing vitamins that come with not just the vitamins, but the minerals that come with those root veggies. I would also say, one thing that I love about the fall and the winter, specifically the winter, is citrus. We have a lot of citrus that come in, you know, oranges and tangerines and things like that. And actually one of the reasons for that is because we need more vitamin C for immune health. So eating more of those citrusy fruits and veggies. I did mention pomegranates primarily because of how much anthocyanin and anti-inflammatory phytonutrient properties that it has in there to help with, I mean, it really, I would say autumn and for fall and winter are very immune months or immune seasons. Like we really do need to focus on immune health a lot, and supporting different neurotransmitters with all the different minerals that are in those foods too.
Yeah.
Like serotonin and dopamine, vitamin D, that kind of thing. Figs are wonderful. If you're not a fig eater, figs are really, really wonderful.
I had figs for the first time like 2 years ago. I like very rarely have them. I'm glad that you said that, but they're so good.
They're so good. They're packed with vitamin K. They're packed with B6, potassium. We do need more iron, especially as we lead into the fall and the winter time. And those actually have quite a bit of iron for a piece of fruit. So yeah, I would say those are ones that I really try to focus on.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great. A couple of other questions, I guess, here real quick to kind of wrap things up is actually I'm gonna entertain this just because it was interesting. You know, you mentioned like the orange, the yellows, and the reds are very big foods that we eat in the fall. Is there any like correlation as to what the leaves change? The leaves always change to those colors as well. Is there like I feel like there's got to be some sort of like reasoning, the correlation to the seasons and the nature and how we operate. I don't know.
Or just Earth is really good at interior design. It's like, oh, I think this will match really well with the food. I really couldn't tell you. I think I don't know about why the leaves turn that color, but that's true. I hadn't put that together.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? But I know you're a plant-based advocate. Now, you mentioned a number of things like B vitamins, like iron, and some other like micronutrients and vitamins and minerals and things like that that are maybe more traditionally found in a little bit higher abundance in meat-based foods or in animal-based foods. What are some of the things that when you are helping people with a plant-based diet, and then you mentioned the importance of protein, especially as you're getting older. What are the things that you try to emphasize from a plant-based diet standpoint to ensure that people are still getting adequate protein, adequate B vitamins, iron, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think right away, the certain foods like lentils, legumes, you know, nuts and seeds, things like that are staples in plant-based eating. But I will say I always, you know, I'm not as staunch on plant-based eating. There's lots of people that do in certain times of your life, like I said, that people do better with certain amounts of animal proteins. When I talk about plant-based eating, I talk about what is the focal point of your meal and what is the supplementary piece. In Western cultures, meat is the focal point and veggies are kind of a side gig. In plant-based eating, in my opinion, the plants are the primary gig, and then you know, animal proteins can supplement a couple times a week, maybe, or whatever. So I think that that's an important thing to clarify. But then again, you know, I'm currently pregnant, so I am eating a lot more animal proteins in my diet. But prior to that, I was probably 90% plant-based. I would say pesca ovo vegan mostly. I would eat eggs and a little bit of fish mostly. And that worked well for me for a long time. Not so much as I was pregnant, because the sheer amount, I had to go from my general 60 grams of protein to 100 grams of protein overnight, basically, with being pregnant. And that was really, I found it very challenging to do that, just with, especially because I can't eat that much. Like I'm like physically can't eat as much as I need to with, you know, the legumes and lentils. So it's different for everybody, but I think plant-based eating is really just where your focal point is. And I think, another really important thing I wanted to say, because I know we're inching in on time, but when I say plant-based eating too, I don't mean going to Trader Joe's or Whole Foods and getting all of their vegan chips and vegan, all of the one for one, the vegan cheeses. A lot of people do. I feel like that when people think plant-based eating, like, oh, let me just go get the exact replica, the synthetic replica of the thing that I know. When in fact, when you want to embark on a plant-based eating diet, I think it's really helpful to just let it be different than what you knew. So instead of like, oh, I'm going to have a Impossible Burger with, not that you can't have an Impossible Burger with vegan cheese, like try something different. Try, it's not going to be a one-for-one comparison. Because I think when people think that way, they get disappointed because it's not going to be what they knew. It's not going to be the same thing. It doesn't taste the same. You might be disappointed. So if you just try new recipes, new things, focusing on whole plant-based foods, like I said, like lentils and legumes and nuts and seeds and different pestos and pastas and things like that, I think you might be surprised that you like new things that maybe couldn't be translated into an animal-based diet, right? So I think there's just a little bit of confusion when people go vegan or vegetarian, that like, oh, I can just go buy all the vegan vegetarian snack foods and I'll be good. Like, no, that's actually just as bad, if not worse. That's almost worse than eating your meat, or doing whatever. So I just want to make sure that that's super clear.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up, because that is definitely I feel like probably a common mistake amongst certain number of people who go vegan or vegetarian. But this has been absolutely awesome. I feel like there's been so much great information. We talked a lot about different testing. We talked a lot about seasonal eating, which was super fascinating, and a little bit of the plant-based stuff at the end as well. This has been great. You guys need to go make sure you follow Melanie on Instagram and on TikTok at Health and Melness. We'll have that down in the description down below. And you can also go to our website, MelanieMurphyRD.com. Is there any other good place where people should go learn more about you and what you're up to?
Those are my main ones. Yeah. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, you guys make sure you go back and write some of those foods down, as we are now in the thick of autumn, in the thick of fall, and heading into winter. I know me personally, I'm going to go. Yeah, right. I'm definitely going to make sure I get my pumpkins in. I'm going to make sure I hit some more pomegranates and things. I'm going to make sure I hit my figs, all the orange and yellow and red foods. Yeah, there you go. Awesome. All the great stuff. So, Melanie, this has been an absolute blast today. You guys make sure you go follow her. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button so you always get updated on the new episodes. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe below. Hope you guys learned a lot today. Melanie, I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
What an insightful and unique episode with Melanie. She shared some powerful strategies for improving gut health, detoxifying the body, and aligning your nutrition with the season that we're in. The main piece of value from today's conversation was for me to think about the more targeted approach about the specific foods that I'm eating during the season that I'm in, based off of what is growing at that time of year. Before we wrap up, don't forget to hit the follow button if you're listening on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button down below, because you guys want to get notified with the future episodes that we have coming out, because we have jam-packed with value, whether it's health, nutrition, fitness, mindset, goal setting. We've got it all. Here are my 3 biggest takeaways from today's episode and an interview with Melanie. Number 1, the importance of testing. There's so many of you guys out there I know who are struggling with some things. And oftentimes, if you just go to your regular doctor, you're not going to be getting the tests that you need to really get down to the root of your issue. So you can take some of the tests that she mentioned today, like the Oat Test, to determine what kind of issues you're truly facing. Number 2, effective detox strategies. She talked about the importance of ensuring we're doing things that are not allowing mold to stay in our system, that are not allowing yeast to stay in our system. And I think one of the most practical ones that all of us can always do is make sure that we're not eating simple sugars first in our meals, that we're eating protein, healthy fat, and healthy fiber, and that we have well-balanced meals. And then lastly, I think my favorite part of the episode was about circadian seasonal eating, adapting what you eat to the season that we're in, and also to the daylight patterns. Like, luckily, I'm somebody who doesn't really do intermittent fasting, maybe not luckily, but I think that it's really cool concept to think about how it's important to eat in the first couple of hours when you wake up, and then maybe not eat quite as much at night. Now, I can't personally say that I do that to a T every single day. I'm going to maybe work on that a little bit more, but it just kind of makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. Like when You wake up, you have a big meal because you don't know what's going to happen throughout your day. So you need to fuel and feel energized. And it also makes sense from an evolutionary perspective to eat what is in season, because that is the only thing that they could actually eat at that particular time, what is in season. So it kind of makes sense that our biology is wired to best be healthy when we're eating what's in season. Now, again, that's probably one of those priorities that is going to get you the last 10% of the way and really optimizing your health. It's not the first thing that you need to be taken care of when it comes to what you're eating, but I think it is a great way to help optimize your health and especially optimize your immune system. If you can do these things, you'll continue to get closer to the healthiest version of yourself, and ultimately you'll get closer and closer to your best.